Hi, I'm Laura Richman, and I'm counsel in Mayor Brown's capital markets practice. The SEC's universal proxy rules are in effect for shareholder meetings held after August 31st, 2022. So they'll apply for the 2023 proxy season. The key provisions for universal proxy are contained in Rule 14A-19 and Rule 14A-4. And what these rules do is to provide for mandatory use of a universal proxy card for proxy solicitations for all contested elections for directors, except for solicitations that are exempt under Rule 14A-2B, which is a narrow exemption where proxies, revocations, or consents aren't being requested. So each party in a contested election will distribute its own universal proxy card, and it has to include the names of all nominees for director, whether they're solicited by the company or by dissident shareholders. Proxy access nominees would also be included on that card. This process allows shareholders voting by proxy to pick and choose among different slates of candidates, similar to how they could vote for directors at an in-person contested shareholders meeting. A universal proxy card must clearly distinguish between the categories of nominees, and within each group, the nominees must be listed in alphabetical order and in the same font type, style, and size. The proxy card must prominently disclose the maximum number of nominees for which voting authority can be granted. It also has to disclose the treatment and effect of a proxy that's executed in a manner that grants authority to vote for fewer or more nominees than the number of directors being elected, or that doesn't grant authority to vote with respect to any nominees. If a dissident intends to solicit proxies for a competing slate of director nominees in a contested election, it must give the company notice of its nominees at least 60 calendar days prior to the anniversary of the company's previous year's annual meeting date. The notice requirement is in addition to any advance notice requirements that the company may have in its governing documents. The dissident has to file its definitive proxy statement 25 calendar days prior to the annual meeting date, or 5 calendar days after the company files its definitive proxy with the SEC, whichever is later. And it must solicit the holders of shares representing at least 67% of the voting power for the election of directors. The company must disclose in its proxy statement how it intends to treat proxies granted in favor of the dissident's nominees if the dissident either abandons its solicitation or fails to comply with the universal proxy rules. By contesting to be named in the company's proxy statement, a nominee also would be consenting to be named in the dissident's proxy statement and vice versa. Both the company's and the dissident's proxy statements would have to refer to the other side's proxy statement for information about that party's nominees and explain how shareholders can access that other proxy statement. In connection with universal proxy, the SEC amended proxy rules relating to voting options and standards applicable to director elections, and these will apply in the 2023 proxy statement, whether or not there's a contested election. Specifically, Rule 14A-4B requires proxy cards for all director elections to include an against option instead of a withhold option if governing law gives legal effect to a vote against a nominee. And if the governing law doesn't give legal effect to votes cast against a nominee, the proxy card may not provide a means to vote against the nominee. Instead, it must clearly provide specified means to withhold authority to vote for each nominee. If a director election is governed by a majority voting standard, shareholders that neither support nor oppose a nominee must be given the opportunity to abstain as opposed to withholding authority to vote. And proxy statements must disclose methods by which votes will be counted, including the treatment and effect of a withhold vote in an election of directors. So there you have it, the highlights of universal proxy. To learn more, please visit our free writings and perspective blogs. Thank you very much for listening.